Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. Alright everyone, welcome to episode 141 of Tokyo Wave. We are your hosts Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
political happenings,
business,
and other random garbage.
To get us started, here are this week's top news highlights.
Government to aid Central Japan quake recovery with more subsidies.
Japan Airlines to preserve part of burned aircraft from Tokyo airport collision.
Business leaders and experts call on government to stabilize Japan's population at 80 million people by year 2100.
This week in Japan. Alright, so our first story. Government to aid Central Japan quake recovery with more subsidies.
Kyodo News has reported that the Japanese government on January 11th designated a powerful earthquake that rocked Ishikawa Prefecture and other parts of central Japan on New Year's Day, quote, a disaster of extreme severity, which will help them boost subsidies for reconstruction work in the affected communities.
Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's government aims to expand its financial support for local authorities to implement measures such as the speedy reconstruction of roads and farmland following the magnitude 7.6 quake that left 213 people dead and 37 unaccounted for.
Improving the living conditions of the victims and addressing their health needs has become an urgent risk.
The death toll includes 8 people who are believed to have died due to the deterioration of their health following the quake, in some cases because of stress associated with evacuation.
In a related move, the Ishikawa prefectural government on January the 11th launched a body to implement measures to prevent the spread of infectious diseases in evacuation centers.
According to the Health Ministry, as of January 9th, around 70 cases of respiratory disease, such as COVID-19 and influenza, had been reported, and around 40 cases of gastrointestinal illnesses, including norovirus infections.
A total of 24,000 people were staying in 400 evacuation centers set up by cities and towns, as well as in facilities located in less affected zones following the January 1st quake that registered a maximum 7 on the country's seismic intensity scale. I think we can't talk about this with just expressing the shock that such a huge earthquake affected the Noto Peninsula and Ishikawa. I mean, it was a complete surprise that this happened on New Year's Day.
Yeah, that really sucked. I think everyone's kind of been, or was glued to the TV for sure, for all day and for the following week.
No, definitely. We even felt it here in Tokyo, where we had about a 3 on the Japanese Shindo scale, which was a pretty significant shake.
Yeah. It also shook where I was in Chiba. It was like really slow, left and right, like you're on a boat. So we knew it was big.
Yeah, we were not on a boat. And up next, Japan Airlines to preserve part of burned aircraft from Tokyo airport collision.
Kyodo News has also reported that Japan Airlines is considering preserving part of the jetliner burned after colliding with a Japan Coast Guard aircraft at Tokyo's Haneda Airport last week as a reminder of the fatal accident to raise safety awareness within the company.
The collision on a runway killed 5 of the 6 people aboard the Coast Guard's Bombardier aircraft and left its captain severely injured, while all 379 passengers and crew on the Japan Airlines Airbus A350 managed to escape.
The carrier will formally decide on whether to keep part of the wreckage depending on the course of the investigation by the Japan Transport Safety Board and the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department.
Even if Japan Airlines decides to save the aircraft, the company is likely to keep only a selected portion of the remains of its aircraft, given the extensive damage and high storage costs.
Japan Airlines is known for showcasing at its facility in Tokyo parts of the aircraft and personal belongings from a crash in 1985 that remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in history, with 520 lives lost.
The wreckage from the latest crash was cleared from the runway on January 7th and is now stored at the airline's facility at the airport.
The collision occurred at Japan's busiest airport at 5:47 p.m. on January 2nd, with everyone aboard the Japan Airlines plane evacuated by 6:05 p.m.
The escape of all the passengers and crew has been widely praised, with some foreign media describing it as a miracle. The aircraft was subsequently swallowed up in flames.
You know, Parker, I was traveling to my girlfriend's family's house on the 2nd, and the earthquake had just happened, right? So after the earthquake happened, there were fires on TV nonstop, right? So we get to my girlfriend's mom's house, and there's fire on the TV. And we're like, oh God, like it's more fires. But they're like, no, that's Haneda Airport. And like, dude, I hate flying. So it's just like worst freaking nightmare, you know?
Yeah, it's really sad that right after this devastating earthquake, we had a major aircraft incident. And it was just, horror after horror, and really a sort of macabre way to start the new year.
For sure. Yeah, my American friends couldn't stop talking about how everybody survived, though, which is incredible.
Yeah, let's hope that we don't see another incident like that in the future.
All right, and up next, business leaders and experts call on government to stabilize Japan's population at 80 million by year 2100.
According to the Mainichi, a group of Japanese private sector leaders and population decline experts met with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on January the 9th and submitted a proposal called Population Vision 2100, with the goal of stabilizing Japan's population at 80 million people in year 2100.
According to a long-term projection released last year by a National Research Institute, Japan's population in 2100 is expected to be 63 million, half of what it is today.
The proposal by the Population Strategy Council, chaired by Akio Mimura, honorary chairman of Nippon Steel, warns that if this trend continues, the socio-economic system will be forced into an endless cycle of contraction and withdrawal, and Japan will face a grave situation where the range of individual choices for how to live will be severely curtailed. It also called for the integrated promotion of a steady states strategy, which aims to slow the pace of population decline, and also a robustness strategy, which aims to make Japan capable of economic growth even with a much smaller population.
The vision then called for strategies to put the highest priority on improving the income and employment of younger people, with the aim of boosting the total fertility rate to 2.07 as of 2060 in order to stabilize the population at 80 million in 2100.
It also noted the need for a comprehensive strategy for foreign residents, including permanent residents who come to Japan for work. It then urged the government to formulate a national vision looking ahead to the year 2100 and to establish a population strategy promotion headquarters as a command post addressing issues including regional development and policies for foreigners. It also called on Japan's National Diet to build cross-party consensus towards enacting a law laying out a population strategy roadmap.
This sounds positive. I mean, paired with, I think there's 3 new visas coming out, like the digital nomad visa is coming out soon, hopefully.
Yeah, it's like, it's dropping like rap albums. They just keep on, new visas!
Yeah,
another one!
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that this is a lot of wishful thinking, and Japan really needs to start looking at immigration as the solution to its population crisis, because let's face it, thinking that Japan is going to magically have an increased birth rate of almost twice what it is now is simply nuts.
Yeah, totally.
So I really do think that the Japanese government needs to look to immigration and really look to bring more people into Japan, because that's the only way we're going to keep some stability in the nation's population.
Well said.
And up next, we have a special interview with today's guest, Lauren Rose Kocher, Japan music industry expert and entrepreneur.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Tokyo Wave.
Lauren is a music industry expert and entrepreneur who has spent her career working in Japan. She is the founder of Vegas PR Group, a multilingual PR agency in Tokyo that offers artist services and international promotions, as well as digital marketing, playlist pitching, and more.
Lauren started her career at concert promoter Kyoto Tokyo and then spent 6 years in business development at Sony Music Japan. In 2019, Lauren co-founded Zyko, a ticketing and live streaming platform that grew to become a market leader in digital events during the pandemic.
She is an advisor to the Japanese Cabinet Office on intellectual property and often speaks at conferences and to the media, including radio and TV. Lauren is very well known within the Japanese entertainment industry and is connected to media, live events, artist management, labels, and publishers.
She is passionate about bringing new tech to the entertainment industry, especially to solve rights management and distribution challenges, alternative artist funding, and the place of Asian and other non-Western content in the global music industry.
So, Lauren, welcome to Tokyo Wave. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I think the first question we really throw at everyone is, we ask about your Japan story. Like what brought you here? And, you have such a fascinating background and experience in starting your own business in Japan as well. Could we hear a little bit more about how you got started?
Thanks for asking. So I moved to Japan 15 years ago. I was an English teacher at GABA for 1 year. And that was after I studied Japanese in university. So when I graduated, it was 2008, the year of the Lehman shock. And I wasn't really having luck with my job hunt in America. And I thought, I'll just delay that. I'll move to Japan. I'll teach English for a year or two, and then I'll figure it out. But after 1 year, I started looking for other jobs because I really wanted a chance to use Japanese. I was like, I moved all the way to Japan. I'm speaking in remedial English every day with a bunch of 55-year-old Japanese men in a one-on-one lesson at GABA. That can't be how this ends. So I applied for every job I could find, from recruiters to consulting places, and I didn't have any experience. And the interviews didn't go well, but one company, Kyoto Tokyo, which is a concert promoter, so they do live events, mostly entertainment, I got the job. I got the job there. That's the only one I got. But it was also my first choice because I was like, wow, that would be so cool to work on concerts in Japan. So I worked there for 2.5 years, and I did tours of artists like Cyndi Lauper and Earth, Wind and Fire,
Whoa.
Michael Bolton, Kenny G, and then also younger artists, but a lot of sort of legacy artists at venues like Orchard Hall. And yeah, it was great. And I loved it so much. And mostly because until that job, I was a very sort of over-serious person and a student. And I had studied a lot and I had really overthought pretty much everything. But when you're in the entertainment industry, what you realize is the most successful people are definitely not the smartest. They're just often hustlers that kind of fell into some luck when their best friend got famous. Or, it's really, there's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of hits that come out of nowhere. And it was just really interesting for me to work in this fun environment that you can't study the music industry. You can't get a master. I mean, you could, but it would be useless, get a master's in music management. You just have to do it. And that was so against what I had done until that moment, where I was always preparing, but never actually doing anything. And to be thrown into that sort of live, chaotic environment, it kind of, it flipped something in my brain. And I loved it. So, but I did leave that job because you work a lot when you do events, at the end of the concert, then you have to clean up for however many hours. You have to take people out to eat. It's long days. So I got a little burnt out and I left. And then someone I knew through that job was working at Sony Music, and Sony Music was looking for someone specifically to work on the boy band One Direction. I don't know if people remember them from probably 10 years ago now.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
They were huge in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so You're welcome. No.
Oh, it was all thanks to you. Okay.
Well, so part of that was like, oh, here's a boy band coming. Japan loves a boy band. And so, Sony Music is the record label. They put out the music, but there's a lot of ways you can make money from music that isn't selling music. You can do merchandise. You can do endorsements. You can do sponsorships. You can do a fan club, but those are not rights that a record label has. Those rights belong to the artist management, or they belong to the merchandising company that handles things globally. So it's actually a lot of negotiation to get any type of business outside of that recorded music function. So that's what I was working on. So that if it does go well, we'll have all our bases covered. And we can make merchandise or do retail licensing or cast them in a commercial, which we did in a Docomo commercial for 3 quarters, Sankuru.
Wow.
Yeah, it was huge. It was so interesting. And it was, again, just the greatest job. I'm on the phone to One Direction's entertainment lawyer, completely unqualified. and, at that point, their entertainment lawyer is probably the best in the world at being an entertainment lawyer. So it was really exciting. I learned so much. And I stayed at Sony for 6 years. I worked on a lot of different projects. That was my in, but then I stayed and I worked on a huge variety of projects and I learned so much. But I started feeling, I was about 30 years old. I was 10 years in Japan. And I felt like I was hitting a ceiling inside Sony. And also a lot of Japanese companies, you can't be a manager of people if you're not in your 40s, for example. And I felt like, well, I'm almost 10 years in Japan. What do I have to show for it? Not enough, I felt like. And I wanted a chance to sort of be the boss of something with a little more responsibility, or I don't know what. And I had trouble finding that inside Sony. It was like, well, yeah, 10 years from now, when you're in your 40s,
you could be a manager.
You could be a kacho. You could be a sub-manager,
Yeah.
You could be a female kacho. Great. So I felt like, this, and it was hard for me because I really, really loved the Sony job. Such a great company. It's a cushy company. The people are so lovely. It was just amazing. I still have a lot of respect for like Sony as an organization and as a global company. One of the things they say is we want everyone who worked at Sony, even if they don't work here anymore, to have Sony on their resume as something positive for their life. And like, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, that's a really rare thing to hear from a Japanese company because, Japanese companies almost expect you to work for your entire career.
That's so true. Yeah. No, it felt like a really lovely place to be. I really enjoyed it. But anyways, enough of the Sony love. So I left and then I co-founded a company with 3 other co-founders called Zyko, and it's a ticketing platform. And I was the non-technical person. So both the CEO and the CTO were both engineers building this digital platform that anyone can sell concert tickets or event tickets was the concept. And I was sort of the music industry person. I was COO and I was in charge of sales, business development, kind of customer service too, or operations, maybe the soft side of the business, but it's also about the money. So that's very hard. And then I ran that as COO for 3 years, and we were a ticketing company. The big idea was back in 2019, it's like the Olympics are coming, and think of all the events that will happen, but no one can get tickets for them because it's so hard to buy a ticket if you don't speak Japanese or have a Japanese credit card.
So true.
It's so hard to get a ticket here, even if you can read Japanese. I have trouble all the time.
You've got to go to Lawson and then use the ticket machine and then enter the 20-digit code and then phone a friend because you know what's going on. It's ridiculous.
I always ask my friends, can you get a ticket for me and then just pay them back? Even today. I mean, I feel like this is a hugely underserved industry in Japan. Anyways, yeah.
No, it's true. It's all these machines in the convenience stores. That's because the main 3 ticketing companies in Japan, PIA, Lawson, and E+, their shareholders are all convenience stores. So Lawson is obviously Lawson Ticket is owned by Lawson. Ticket PIA's a big shareholder is 7-Eleven, and E+, a big shareholder is Family Mart. So they're trying to drive people to retail so you can buy a pack of gum when you put in your 20-digit, ticket code into the machine. So it's part of a retail strategy for driving consumers to convenience stores. That's why it's so heavily reliant on paper tickets. It's a whole system stacked against you.
That's amazing. I've never even heard this explanation, but
No,
now
this is fascinating. Now it makes sense.
it makes sense now. I've been here.
Cracked the code. Lauren, you helped us crack the code.
I've been here 10 years too, and I can never get a ticket here. I mean, I think I bought the ticket for the first time like a month ago, but because my buddy sent me the link,
Get the link.
But
It's gotten
still,
a little bit better, but still pretty bad.
yeah, there's no even like on a lot of online systems, like when you buy it, after you put in your credit card, push submit, there's no like confirmation. Sometimes they'll have just like an HTML5 page, and you have to like screenshot that.
Yeah, you have to print it out and bring it to the concert. Here's my piece of paper. Let me in.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So you took your experience in the entertainment industry, and now you are the founder of Vegas PR Group. So I'd like to ask you, what led you to start your own company?
Well, Parker, I really thought, why not? Didn't have the greatest reason.
Yeah, it's actually similar to my own story. When I founded Parthenon Japan in 2018, 6 years now, I was just like, I'm bored. I'll start a company, whatever. Make a website. I'm good at that.
Yeah, it's technically my second company, but the first one without co-founders. And that company, Zyko, had a lot of investment from VCs. It was sort of a different type of thing. It's a startup with tech. But this company, it's my agency. It's homegrown. It's very much me building it like one brick at a time. Feels so good. I just think I don't have the ability to work for anyone else anymore either. I don't think that would go well.
Yeah, no, I consider myself unemployable, so.
Also, amen to not working for anyone else. I took Parker's the one who got me to start my company as well. So I'm curious. So you have so much incredible history and experience here in Japan, and it's so cool hearing that you got started in like concerts and doing that is like your first job after teaching English here in Japan.
Yeah, I got started as an English teacher. So
Yeah.
A little leg up there.
But then like catapulted into all these crazy things that like I think a lot of people dream of, especially like musicians and people who are, want to get into music. So are you kind of continuing a lot of like at Japan Vegas PR Group, what's the kind of normal week or day for you? Like what kind of work are you involved in right now there?
Yeah, so we specialize in entertainment, and a full half of our work is promoting music or anime, a type of entertainment content or IP. So we're promoting that entertainment content to fans or trying to increase fans. And then the other half of our work is more corporate PR, but most of those companies that we work for are also involved in entertainment. And then a few startups that we also work for because of my startup background. So the stuff we do is really driven by, I think, my own experience. But yeah, half entertainment content, half entertainment adjacent companies and startups.
I feel like, I actually, I grew up playing music, and I played in bands in the US. I did a little bit of like local touring. When I came to Japan, I stopped music. But, it sounds like you've got the skill set that like every musician that like wants to like be paired with. Like even the way you're talking about it, the way you reference it as IP, for example. Most musicians like don't have no idea about any of that,
It's
right?
an IP, man.
Yeah.
Is it good at the banjo?
No, but this is so cool, and it's specific to Japan. You talked about One Direction earlier. I'm curious, like, have you specialized in bringing a lot of foreign bands to Japan, or do you work with local Japanese acts and entertainers as well?
So most of my career in the beginning was foreign or overseas international artists coming to Japan, whether that was touring or for Sony Music. But as that went on, I was always having these little projects that would pop up like, oh, it's a Japanese artist with an inquiry from the US for a show or a sponsorship or a collaboration. And that would often fall in my lap because there's not very many non-Japanese people in the Japanese music industry. So a lot of that would kind of just flow downstream to me. And whether volunteer or just casual advice, I was often working with Japanese artists. And then now it is very much targeted our business for Japanese record labels, which I probably shouldn't say to this English-speaking podcast listening group. Honestly, I think a lot of these Japanese record labels need all the help they can get. Until very recently, 99% of their sales were physical CDs. Sold in Japan for $35 at Tower Records, right? And if they wanted to sell the music overseas, they had to find a record label to license it, to press the CDs, to sell the CDs in the store overseas. A lot of them were against digital distribution because they thought it would eat into their physical revenue. So they don't want to put, when I started working at Sony Music, they refused to put any of their Japanese catalog on iTunes still. That was like 2014 or 13 or something.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been a long time coming that the shift to digital music consumption and revenue from digital sources like Spotify or Amazon Music or Apple Music, like that's finally hitting Japan for the first time, which means every single piece of music released from Japan is now a global release because it can be listened to on Spotify anywhere in the world. But all the people at these record labels are still really focused on reaching a Japanese audience and really kind of new to the fact that their release is global in a sense in terms of distribution. And so I think there's just so much room. Like, I think the Japanese music industry could double in size in 5 years if all of this, I mean, that might be a little too aggressive. But it could grow considerably. Look at the anime audience. Anime now makes more money outside of Japan than inside Japan.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
100%. And so, you have these trailers for upcoming anime with like 6 million views on YouTube, English trailers for upcoming anime. Imagine 20% of those people fall in love with the theme song and listen to the artist on Spotify. And any Japanese artist on Spotify with 4 million listeners a month would immediately be on the very top of the whole industry for Spotify numbers. So it's just really interesting. If you're into numbers, if you're into digging around, there's a lot of stuff happening right now that's never happened before because of the internet. And so this is just a really long way to say that although we do work with international artists and international organizations, in some sense, they're a little more sophisticated with what they're doing. And the Japanese entertainment industry is facing something that they've opportunities they've never seen before. And also challenges with the loss of that CD or DVD revenue, right? It's actually really hurting them. So that to me is a more pressing issue and where we can really contribute. And that's where we tend to focus, I would say.
One thing you said that's extraordinarily interesting, and I think a lot of people outside of Japan, it would be hard for them to believe, is you said up until recently, they've relied on these physical CD sales. And I think, I don't remember up until when, but I was going and renting CDs still here in Japan.
Yeah, even, renting a CD and burning it on your computer.
And then adding it to your
illegal
iPhone. Yeah. But at these CD rental stores, they sell all the blank discs. They have, I remember that.
Well, it's funny because Japan is one of the strictest nations when it comes to, digital copyright management. But at the same time, it invented all of the technology to pirate music.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it, reel to reel, cassette tapes, MDs, mini discs. Remember those?
Yeah.
They were all about burning music.
Yeah.
From CDs or from the radio or from whatever.
This is true.
Made in Japan.
Yeah, and Lauren, another point you just mentioned, which I think maybe people outside of Japan don't really see the difference. You're talking about how, when they release something, they're not realizing how global it is. I think a great example is the new Ghibli film. They didn't even do any commercials here, right? And then when they casted the voices, they got the biggest actors in the world to do all the voices for that. And it's like gigantic, like everyone's raving about it abroad. But domestically, I heard there was like, it like wasn't really popular here or something like that.
I didn't really hear that much about it.
Yeah. It was either you didn't hear anything about it or heard negative stuff. But now it's like they think he's going to be nominated for an Academy Award and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, which is nuts. But definitely you're describing like something I see in like other industries, like this huge gap and kind of the understanding of local companies and stuff here of how valuable their IP is abroad. That's so cool that you're kind of working in that sector.
Yeah, one thing about, you're talking about the potential of the Japanese record industry and the potential for Japanese artists and Japanese music to become more globally appreciated. But up until recently, I feel like there's been this sort of undercurrent of Japanese music just isn't as good as like K-pop or other foreign music. And there was an issue in its international marketability. So when you hear things like that, and I'm sure you've heard stuff like that before, Lauren, what do you think? Do you think they're full of shit, or is there some merit to that sort of school of thought?
It's a really interesting question. So someone who makes music or who works at a music publisher with songwriters and producers would have a much better opinion. But one of the things that you do hear, for example, is Japanese music doesn't have a lot of bass. Japanese music tends to be up here. It's very high. It's all treble. It's all melody. There's not a lot of thump, thump, thump. Listen to Billie Eilish, from 5-6 years ago, whatever that was. It's all just way down, down, down.
Low mid.
Yeah. And then
bass.
Listen to any mainstream Japanese song from a female singer-songwriter. It is way, way up high. And there's just no balance to it, I guess you could say. Or you could say it's too bass heavy. It just depends what perspective you're coming from. You could say Billie Eilish is way too whatever. So that's one thing that you hear a lot. Another thing you hear a lot is that Japanese musicians who have been trained as like back musicians, to play on albums, play in tours, that Japanese musical education is a little too rote. Certain Japanese rock bands, when you listen, it is very much on the beat. A lot of like J-rock is like, so I'm clapping, but it's very clappable. It's like exactly on the beat every single time. Where if you listen to American rock music, it's a little more syncopated. It's a little more like riding the beat rather than like exactly hitting it. And so sometimes you listen to even very recent, very energetic, very rocky J-pop, but it's exactly hitting every single line. But, I don't know if that's better or worse. That's just a style of performance. And some of the really interesting stuff like Ado, Yoasobi, that is doing, those are the best performing Japanese songs outside of Japan in the world right now. Those artists, their songs are the best performing Japanese songs outside of Japan in the world. And they're fast paced. They're a little higher pitched or whatever, but they're also very sad. And that's kind of a trend going on right now where it's like this melancholic, high pace, like high tone, like hyper Jap. It's not hyper pop, but there's all these things happening, right? And so it depends like what kind of music do you listen to or what is your personal taste. But I've always been of the opinion that Japanese music is not well made enough for like all the geniuses in America. Like really, that doesn't do anything for me. If you really wanted to be annoying, you could talk about mixing and mastering, and definitely the people who are mastering music, adjusting the final recording to make it sound incredible. The people who are doing that in like the UK, for example, are higher skilled than most of the people in Japan. But a lot of Japanese record labels hire the people in the UK to do it. You can just send them the file. Another thing, it's different if you master a song for a CD versus for Spotify, for people who listen on headphones versus people who listen on AirPods. And sometimes things sound better on the radio or on your computer. And so it depends where do you want people to hear it the most and how do you want that to sound? You know, there's a whole concept of music getting louder these days so that it stands out. So there's so many like questions involved in music production, and I'm not even an expert. And for me, what I think more than anything else is certain types of J-pop have a very distinct sound. And that's the most important thing. You know, think about like reggae or like Afro beats or like rock and roll or whatever, grime. There's all these genres from all these places around the world, and they have a specific language and a specific sound, and then they become a global influence. And there's certain types of J-pop that have that. And that's so important, you know?
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is overlooked is that, you know, J-pop is J-pop. I mean, it is its own distinct flavor. It has its own sound. And, you know, it's not going to just magically change overnight because the main audience of J-pop is Japanese. And Japanese people in Japan have been listening to J-pop and watching it evolve. And there's a certain expectation of what things are going to sound like. So to make music popular in Japan, it sort of has to have a certain sound, or it won't sound like everything else. And then people are just going to freak out because it doesn't sound like everything else. I remember in the beginning, Lady Gaga, who got super popular around the world, was having trouble because a lot of her songs had a house beat, which was different from what was being played on American radio back when people still listened to the radio. And once Lady Gaga became huge, the house beat in American music started coming out of nowhere. And before you knew it, everybody's using it. And now it's the same thing. Like you look at a lot of American popular artists, they're using hip hop beats, they're using house beats. It's very, it's very bass heavy. It's very EDM style. And that totally changed over the last, decade and a half or so. But looking back on, the potential for Japanese music in the global market, obviously, the Japanese artists have their own way of doing things. And in some ways, it doesn't jive with sort of the global trends. Do you see Japanese artists becoming more globalized as the global market becomes a bigger piece of pie for these Japanese labels, or is that something that still hasn't come to fruition?
So it depends on your perspective, because one thing that is happening is that until now, global sales of music were so heavily American and British, right? So like global music culture is American music. But now, if you look at the top 5 all-time streaming artists on Spotify for like last year, or maybe it was 2022. It includes Bad Bunny, who only sings in Spanish, and BTS, who mostly sing in Korean. So now the top artists in the world include Spanish speakers, Korean speakers. That's never really happened in terms of like numbers exactly. Usually the top artists in the world are artists from America. So I think rather than like Japan maybe somehow matching that, I think that American music will become less relevant. I think that there'll be superstars from a lot of countries that aren't America. And so that like dominant music culture will get more and more diversified.
That's fascinating. I mean, and really sort of a breath of fresh air because, I mean, people have always commented on how, American and British music has really dominated. And it's really sort of like cultural imperialism where the whole world, consumes the same stuff. But it sounds like that's starting to change pretty much thanks to the internet and YouTube.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And also just when you're selling physical CDs, there's a lot of operational things that go into it. You need a factory to print CDs. You need a warehouse to store them. You need a store to stock them. But yeah, it's just internet now. It's just streams. And so it can come from anywhere. And I think too, like when you're thinking about Japanese artists, whatever the model of success looks like for a Nicki Minaj or a Lady Gaga or a Taylor Swift, that even in the US, there might not be another Taylor Swift because it's getting the music industry is kind of cracking apart a bit. They kind of say like, oh, we'll never have another Michael Jackson where every single person in the world knows who they are. But these days you could say like Beyonce or Taylor Swift might be the actual next Michael Jackson we have.
You're going to piss off the Swifties.
Why? Saying she's the next Michael Jackson. But yeah, no, I mean, like that whole thing about like, there's a lot of buzz in the US about the death of superstardom. And that like this sort of, because there's so many, everything is so niche now, and you can have like a niche superstar. There are these people you've never heard of. No one in this room has ever heard of. And they have like 5 million followers on YouTube and like whatever. They have like 10 million listens a month on Spotify. And you're like, I've never even heard of this person. So that's the kind of stuff the internet allows for. Versus a monoculture where there's like one superstar on TV, you know?
Yeah, a lot of my friends in tech say the same thing too. It's just going to get more and more niche to the point where, like, yeah, as you said, like you could name someone and they have so many followers. And I think it's going to move quicker too. I think, you know, this is just my random thought, but, you know, people will become super, super famous quickly and then lose it. And then it goes to somebody else. And, you know, it's going to be more difficult to like maintain the stardom.
More schizophrenic, basically.
Yeah. That's one way to put it. I want to comment on something that you actually, Lauren, you like described something that I've like had in my head, but I haven't been able to put into words. When you're talking about modern J-pop music and like kind of the range in which it exists, which is more like in the high mid register, and there's a lot of like technical stuff that goes into that, right? You know, but I kind of want to compare that to city pop. And maybe
I was just thinking that because city pop has a lot of bass in it.
Oh, the bass is crazy. It's driving. I just, you know, me and Parker are obsessed with city pop. All of my friends back in the States, like whether they do music or not, everyone, for some reason, because of the internet and Spotify and everything, everyone knows city pop now. And everyone, like, when I talk to friends, they're like, oh, have you heard? They bring up artists that I've never even heard of. And I listen to them like, oh my God, like this is from 1979, 1987, whatever. It's incredible. You know, it's almost on the level of like anime. Like there's all these different animes and stuff. It's not on the same level, probably financially speaking, but as far as like, you know, branding for Japan, like the city pop era is just so damn good. And I wonder how Japan could maybe leverage that going forward.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the problems that the Japanese music industry faces is it's sort of the same way when anime started getting big in America. It was very piracy focused. It was very, you know, hearing it secondhand or just listening on YouTube. You know, there's a lot of like people who are consuming the music and enjoying it, but it isn't being consumed in a way that is profitable or sort of hits the radar of the original producers. So you have this like conundrum where like something like city pop is insanely popular, but the people who made it aren't making any money off of its popularity.
It's like a 40-year time gap. So it's kind of I don't know. But I wonder if there's a way to like harness that popularity, you know, that's kind of exploding, I think, in a lot of countries now. Yeah.
So on a pure music industry standpoint, so for example, a year or 2 years ago, Kate Bush's hit, you know, Kate Bush. So Kate Bush's song Running Up That Hill was used on Stranger Things. And it reached this audience that had never heard the song. Its Spotify streams went crazy. Its YouTube streams went crazy. And it opened up a conversation that had been happening about like marketing of catalog. And catalog is just the word for old music. So now that instead of people buying music once, you get paid every time someone consumes your song, you have to keep the consumption numbers steady. So how do you continue to promote old songs? Because if you can get an old song to explode, all of a sudden there's millions of dollars coming in. And so usually until now, the only marketing resources in a record label were used for new music, because you make music and then you sell it and you're trying to get a lot of people to buy it. But once they bought it, there's no more money really coming in, right? But now you're seeing people move marketing specialists to catalog. So it's like, how can we boost the streaming numbers of this music from 50, 60 years ago? And that's like a brand new thing. And that's the type of thinking that they would need to put around city pop. I mean, you could reissue vinyl versions of albums, right? You could make new things to sell, because when someone becomes a fan of music, there's only so many touch points. You can follow them on social media. You can listen on Spotify or watch on YouTube. You can buy a t-shirt. maybe you can join a fan club, And so it's like, how many touch points do you have for when someone becomes a fan? And right now, City Pop has very few, because they're not doing much anymore, those artists, or some of them aren't even around anymore. So the idea is you could like reissue the vinyl, or you have people that are dedicated to like, what are the monthly streams of some of these City Pop artists? Can we double that? Or can we just keep it consistent? So the revenue from Spotify over the course of 12 months is however much. And once you have like a global hit that has a steady consumption on Spotify and generates a certain amount of revenue, that's an asset for a record label or publisher, and it's an asset that you can predict. It's like the stock market. I don't know. It's money that just continues to come in, and so actually, it's something really worth investing in. But it would have to hit like really significant numbers for it to be worth that investment. But that's probably better than right now what they have, which is doing nothing. But like, not to give too much away, we're talking to a few record labels, and we're often talking about their newer artists, but usually towards the ends of the conversation, like one old guy will be like, what about catalog promotion? And I'm like, you know what? We would love to work on that with you, because it doesn't matter now. It's not if the music is old or new. It's not when people are buying it. It's just how much it's been streamed. That's how much comes in every month. It's a whole new model.
Yeah, I think people really overlook the fact that some people just like old music. Like, I listen to no new music. I listen to 100% old music. I have a lot of it on vinyl, and that's my jam. Like, I just like to listen to old music. I can't put my finger on it, but...
Well, what's really interesting is that the music being streamed on Spotify is like 70% old music. If you look at overall Spotify sales. Whoa. People don't but old music, how old? It just means...
not new.
Not new, from a few years ago or whatever. But it's always going to be mostly old music.
There's just this thing about, my thing is I love music that was made analog. And, that's why I like to listen to record on vinyl. And I like to buy original records because it's not remastered, it's not all digitified. It's the original sound, and it just sounds so good.
Yeah, I think there's so much. Also there's a whole 90s J-pop thing. There's a whole Shibuya K thing.
Oh my God, yeah.
There's Japanese electronic music. There's J-jazz. I also agree. I think it's like you can just keep digging and digging and digging and find more interesting, unusual things that have like global appeal again and again and again. And I don't know, we could get like essentialist about why is Japan so whatever, but I don't know what it is, but it's amazing.
Well, it's just, I think Japanese music culture and the Japanese music industry has always been very domestic focused. And, until recently, the domestic market was good enough. And, these record labels became huge and made lots of money off of the domestic audience. And so a lot of it, though, has been lost in the capsule of time. And there is this huge backlog, this huge back catalog of music that all of these record labels have, and they don't know how to promote it.
Yep, that's where we come in.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's really exciting.
That's awesome.
Also, there is really something to be said for having like a sophisticated market or a large market. You have these Japanese record labels, these Japanese management companies, this Japanese television infrastructure. It's just like this media machine that's made a certain volume of content. And of course, some of it's going to be really good. You know what I mean? Look at Hollywood. Like, Hollywood makes, whatever, quality aside, but Hollywood makes the best movies on earth, in part because it's this huge system that's been going for 100 years that has so many resources, so many people, attracts the best talent, is just like churning out stuff. You know what I mean? And so in certain territories where there wasn't much of a sophisticated music market, there wasn't a lot of record labels. I don't think you have this rich history. But in Japan, like, things were moving and grooving.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially during, Japan's economic heyday. You can listen to these albums. You can just be like, how much money did they spend on making this record? It's like they've got all of these like triple A level musicians doing all the back music. And it's just like, this record must have cost a shitload of money to make. And even like some records, especially from the bubble years, they were made in overseas. They were made in Hawaii. They're made in LA. They're made in London. And it just goes to show you that, when the Japanese record industry was really going gangbusters, they just had unlimited money to do whatever they wanted to.
When I was at Sony, some of the older people at Sony were around during the 90s when you would just make a CD and it would just print money. And they had a whole other style of spending on their expense accounts. It was just beautiful to see. It was like they never left the 90s in terms of...
The glory days are still here!
Yeah, but I mean, I was so jealous. I was like, oh my God, imagine you just put it out and you sold, I don't know, 1 million copies of a $35 CD. God, incredible.
I don't know if you saw this or not, but right in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a docudrama about Ayumi Hamasaki, which is arguably one of the biggest, super artists of Japan. I mean, she got absolutely huge. And for a time, I don't know if this is still true, she was the richest woman in Japan. And, that really sort of encapsulated this sort of late 90s, early 2000s, printing on the little CDs that are only like 5 inches thick. And it was amazing to see how this star was born. And, it was very heavily produced. She was picked not because she was an excellent musician, but because she was beautiful. And then they basically sent her to New York and okay, now you got to learn how to play music.
Yeah.
And that's how it went. But she became the superstar. And, you don't really see that sort of ridiculousness that we saw, 20, 30 years ago. But I wonder, in lieu of that, and I don't know what kind of perspective you might have on this, how is the music industry sort of going with the times and sort of coping with the fact that there isn't unlimited money these days to work on new talent?
Yeah, I mean, if you hear the music industry tell it, budgets have shrank. What you spend to make a music video is almost nothing. What you spend to record your album is much less than it used to be. It's when you don't sell CDs anymore, but you're still not dominant on streaming, or most Japanese people don't even have Spotify. Some of the top superstars in Japan that can sell out Tokyo Dome 3 days in a row, you look at their Spotify and it's like 100,000 monthly listens. It's nothing, but that's not because they're not famous in Japan. It's because no Japanese people have Spotify. Not none, but not a lot. And so it's all kind of getting mixed up. But people love to complain, especially when they're talking to a PR company and tell us how they have no budget. But I'm sure they're fine. They all own these large buildings that house the record label and et cetera, et cetera. But, the budget is just different. That's the thing. When it comes to streaming, you have to look at the lifetime of a record, where if you're selling a CD, you kind of sell it once. And so it's just kind of different. And then unfortunately, a lot of the people who are decision makers at these labels are older, and they built their career during those glory days of the 90s. And so they only look at specific numbers, and they're not dumb or anything. I don't like it when people say oh, why didn't Japan launch Spotify sooner? Or how come the record labels don't put their song on iTunes or whatever back in the day? Because they're staring at numbers. It's a record company that employs 500 people. They know that digital distribution will take a long time to pay off potentially. And that if they start removing the CDs, they're just having the revenue. It's like a business decision. So they weren't being stupid, and they definitely, it's not like they didn't understand what Spotify is or what its potential is, but it's how quickly do you want to cannibalize your physical sales for the future of what digital distribution offers, and it's a much more complex thing than I think people appreciate. But at the same time, they're all still too old fashioned and are not investing enough in the future, which is also the story of Japan. So just a little microcosm of that in the music industry.
For sure. You kind of helped answer a question I was going to ask you, which was, it was in the past, I think 4 or 5 years, but I think in 2009 was the first time I visited Japan, and I went to a CD store. I got all these CDs, and I fell in love with a lot of Japanese artists. And at that time, I think everyone started consuming music on YouTube, but the Japanese artists, they had 30-second clips of their video, and they didn't have the full song, and that used to drive me insane. And it's like, because I could listen to the album. I had bought the album, but I really wanted to listen to it on YouTube. But all of a sudden, like, I remember I was back in the States, I think, and I was on Spotify, and I was like, whoa, all like the K-pop, oh my God, all the J-pop stuff is on Spotify now. It like all happened really, really fast all at once. Was there like a year or a turning point?
Yeah, it was COVID.
Oh, it was COVID. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what changed it.
It was the momentum of things happening and then no one going to stores. So,
that makes
then
sense.
it flipped over. Like if you can look online, all these huge Japanese artists and the year they joined Spotify, most of it's 2020, 2021, for Bees, for Southern All-Stars, for these kind of big old guys. That's when they joined.
That makes sense.
Yeah, got to make that money somewhere.
Yeah.
No one's going to CD shops in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
So obviously we were talking a lot about the music industry and Japan's music industry and the sort of ins and outs of that, but you're in the entertainment PR space. And that's really interesting for me because I also happen to have founded a public relations firm, but I'm not in the entertainment space. And I know it's a very different world than the corporate PR space in which I do business. So I'm curious, what is it like to do public relations in the entertainment industry?
So it's fun, most of all. I think working in entertainment is very fun, just the things you get to work on. It already has a story built in. I think a lot of PR is like building a story around a brand or some type of happening, or you're creating messaging. But when what you're working on is already art, it has a message, it has a story, it has a very captivating person or people who are making it. And so that in some ways makes the job a lot easier because it almost speaks for itself. It has fans. But I would say a difficult part is there's also sensitivities to that because you're interpreting someone else's work, or they maybe want people to receive it a certain way and they're not receiving it that way. And it's just kind of a little more emotional, like story-based thing. Fans can be very problematic. Artists can be a real pain in the butt in any type of artist, and so that's just a little amplified sometimes. You can really step in it by accident.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've heard a lot from people working in the video game industry, because Japanese people are largely thought of as not understanding English, but a lot of them have pretty good reading and writing capabilities. And if you produce something in English about something Japanese, somebody's going to have an opinion about it. And more often than not, it's going to be sort of a half-baked but extremely loud opinion. And so I've heard these sort of war stories of people doing copywriting for video games, and then the producers or the, people who created the game come back and say, no, that's not how you say it. You have to say it like this. And it'll be like totally incorrect English or too wordy or too whatever. And there's that sort of back and forth. And I think when there's creative product involved, that gets really amplified.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Parker. That is really exactly something that happens. Or, fans are very invested in what's going on and they have very strong opinions. And sometimes things just like veer off. Or another thing, too, when you're promoting something and you're trying to get new fans, some people don't like it. Some people think it's the worst song they ever heard. Sometimes they might write that in the comments, and it's maybe a piece you placed. I have a friend who's worked on some Japanese hip hop, and she got some great interviews in mainstream US outlets for Japanese hip hop artists. And the comment section was very rough. And we've done some placements in certain things where maybe it wasn't the right audience, or the audience is just a little strict and they do not like this artist. They do not like this song. And you're the one who put it there, and it feels a little like, oh no, but that's kind of just a risk you have to take when it's something that's like, when it's art, it can be kind of divisive.
Yeah, I think when it comes to any kind of PR, there's always the potential for crisis. And it's not a question of avoiding crisis. It's what to do when it happens. And so I feel like, especially I would imagine in the entertainment world, people are really sensitive to that. But you really have to have thick skin. I think a lot of famous people say now, don't read the comments, don't read the comments. But everybody reads the comments. It's you have to just not care about them.
It's part of the entertainment factor, I think, the comments, I watch YouTube on my Apple TV, but like when I'm watching a certain video, I'm like, oh man, the comment section's got to be awesome on this one, right? It's just, I don't know.
I'll never forget, I was in a YouTube video on a pretty popular YouTube channel doing my other business, selling abandoned Japanese houses to foreigners, of all things. And I was, featured on this YouTube video, and the comments were vicious. They're like, this guy's a snake oil salesman.
Oh, shit.
And I was like, damn,
Really?
Who did I piss off?
Wait, Japanese or English comments?
English comments. They were brutal. And
That's
it's like,
horrible.
I would never work with this guy. He looks like a real, shifty kind of, used car salesman. I was like, damn, that's dark.
Wait. But okay, I'm not in PR. I do marketing, which is, I guess, sort of close. But when this happens, what do you guys do? Like, I would think like, what is it? Wendy's on Twitter is really good at like taking a lot of bad stuff and turning it into good. Like, they're really good at. They've got like a team of for like 20 like former comedy writers, like helping to like, turn bad comments into like promotional situations. Do you guys ever go on there and like argue back with the people?
Hell no. You never respond to the comments.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Okay.
It's also a proven trick of growing a social media following or engagement to have like fake trolls. So you post something on Instagram and then someone's like, you look so stupid in this photo. And then your fans or followers will defend you against that.
1,000
There'll be comments. Yeah. And it's the same thing about putting a typo in like a post you do, or like people will correct the image. So it's just a way of like farming engagement by getting people riled up. But I mean, honestly, we're pretty straightforward. We don't really dig into anything like that. And a couple bad comments about how they don't like this song doesn't
it's not the end of the world.
We've never really hit a crisis, if I'm honest. Like, hey, knock on wood or fingers crossed, or I don't know. I hope we don't hit a crisis. I've had crises in other businesses that I've done that I've had to handle, but nothing for clients yet.
Yeah, well, I've never caused a crisis, but one of my specialties is actually crisis communication. So I've got my fair share of war stories on what happens when the unthinkable happens. And it's always a lot of fun. I actually love working on crises.
That's interesting. I feel like I'm pretty good in a crisis too. Like I'm pretty chill. You can't really make me panic, I don't think, and I'm also kind of like, oh, here it comes, the thing I've been waiting for, the other shoe to drop. Like, this is what I'm always ready for, like everything to go badly, I guess. So it like almost feels like a sense of relief. Like you can't get lower than this point.
Well, it only got this bad.
Yeah. We can only go up from here is kind of how I feel when those things happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the state of the industry and how it's changed, and also how promotion works in the entertainment industry. But where do you see it headed into the future? Like what emerging trends in the Japanese music industry are you most excited about? And how do you think they might influence global music trends? So
to move away a bit from music, because about half of our business is not music content specifically, but they're companies that are involved in that ecosystem, or they're startups that are kind of like really eager for a story. Like they don't have a marketing team. Marketing and PR is often the last hire at a tiny little tech startup, for example. Not calling our clients little, but some of them don't have a lot of resources for that internally. And so they come to us for help. And I like to think that we kind of cross-pollinate, because we'll bring them very off-the-wall ideas about using entertainment, using a character, using a song, using a, comedian or something. We'll try to bring them like very off-the-wall ideas for their company and for their promotion and for their PR. And I would personally really like to see that continue to happen, to where we can be like an entertainment-influenced communications group. And that's kind of a personal goal of mine. But like more broadly, I just think the Japanese industry, when it comes to, it's already happening in anime or gaming, but it will also happen in music, maybe manga, but probably not. We'll see increased overseas revenue, and the market share will shift to where it's less heavily domestic. And the companies that make that shift quicker or invest in it or are clever about it will come out on top.
So basically, long story short, there are going to be winners and losers in the Japanese entertainment industry. And if they want to be winners, they got to talk to Lauren.
Yes, exactly. And you know what's really interesting is for K-pop, when K-pop started bubbling up, and the real thing that pushed it over the edge was the band BTS, right? BTS does not come from one of the big three management companies. The big three management companies in Korea are SM, YG, JYP. And they're the like behemoths of K-pop. BTS was outside that system. And it's kind of the reason they broke through. They were outside the system, so they were more flexible. They just went real heavy on a YouTube strategy. And they just went so hard on YouTube. And none of the big agencies, they have a lot of TV, they have a lot of training. You know, it's a little more TV focused. And I'm not a K-pop expert, but it's just really interesting that the band that broke every single record possible for like a non-American artist globally, BTS, didn't come from the big three that have all the resources in the world, right? And so when you think about J-pop, you know, right now, YOASOBI is Sony, Ado is Universal, and the third most popular Japanese artist outside of Japan, Fujikaze, is independent. But he is released through Universal. He's released through a major label, but his background is a little more independent. And yeah, it's just really interesting. Is he going to be the first Japanese sort of global superstar? And is it because he has this independent route that that's even possible? Because you have to kind of think outside the box. And if you're in this big old system, it's hard to do that. So that's just like an interesting thing. I'm not going to make a prediction either way, but there is like real benefits to not being in a super resource heavy, like legacy entertainment company.
That's really interesting to hear.
That's amazing.
Fujikaze, so many friends in America told me about him first. And he's really active on YouTube. But yeah, I'm a big fan actually.
He's incredible. Yeah,
like he can really do it all. He's an incredible pianist, vocalist. I mean, I think in Korea
he's attractive. You know, he's very good looking. It's great.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah, I feel like we could keep on having this conversation for days. This is really fascinating. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the program today. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you so much. Hey listeners, that's right, you listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp or on Twitter or X.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.